I had just touched down in Seattle after a 14-hour flight from Tokyo when my phone buzzed on the dashboard of the crew van. I thought it would be another weather alert or a schedule change from dispatch. Instead, it was a message from Emily, my wife of 9 years. It was short, brutally short. "Jack, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. Please don't call me." No emotion, no explanation. Just like that, everything I thought was solid in my life slipped through my fingers. I remember the numbness first. The driver was joking about the Mariners' losing streak, and I smiled back like nothing had happened. Inside, though, it felt like a bomb had gone off. I told myself to focus on getting through the evening, one step at a time. At home, her absence was like a physical void. Our bedroom closet was half empty. Some of her things from the bathroom counter were gone. There was a note pinned to the fridge with a magnet, the same magnet we bought on our honeymoon in Barcelona, saying she had taken what she needed and would send for the rest. I opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat down on the couch like it was just any other night. Outwardly calm. Inside, a storm I refused to acknowledge was gathering speed. The first few days, I clung to my routines. I did not text her. I did not call. I went to the gym. I flew my scheduled routes. I smiled at colleagues when they asked how I was doing. I was detached, but functional. Emily had always said pilots were good at compartmentalizing. Maybe that was true. Still, small things started to gnaw at me. Our neighbor, Tom Parker, a handyman who lived across the street, had been a little too familiar at the last barbecue. Emily laughed it off back then, saying Tom was just friendly. Now, I remembered how often she mentioned Tom helping her when I was away, fixing a squeaky gate, changing the kitchen faucet, looking at the heating system when it clunked in winter. At the time, I was grateful. I thought it was neighborly kindness. Now, it felt different. One evening, after flying back from Dallas, I noticed a flicker of movement across the street. Tom's porch light clicked off. For a second, I thought I saw a silhouette behind his window that looked a lot like Emily. My stomach twisted. I brushed it off as paranoia. Fatigue, jet lag, stress. But deep down, something was unraveling. The sense that the foundation under me wasn't just cracked, it had already collapsed, and I had just been too high above it all to see. Over the next few days, coincidences piled up. Tom's truck was parked closer to my driveway than usual. Neighbors who used to wave looked away when I jogged past. Emily's old best friend, Sarah, who used to call me her favorite brother-in-law, suddenly ignored my texts. Something was happening, and it wasn't just Emily leaving. It was bigger, dirtier, more complicated than a simple breakup. I started to wonder, had I been living a lie longer than I thought? And that's when I made the decision. I would find out. Quietly. Systematically. No fights. No begging for answers. I was a pilot. I knew how to stay calm in turbulence. This was just another flight through a storm. But even then, I had no idea how deep the betrayal ran. I did not want to believe it. Not at first. Maybe Emily had left for reasons that had nothing to do with Tom Parker. Maybe she needed space, or found someone else somewhere far away. But that night, sitting alone at the kitchen table under the dim light, I realized that lying to myself would not help. Something was wrong right here, right under my nose. I started simple. I pulled up the security camera app on my phone. The front porch cam had always recorded clips when it detected motion. Scrolling back through the footage, my heart pounded, but my hands stayed steady. There she was. 2 days before the text, Emily on the porch, laughing. Tom Parker standing way too close, handing her a small box, no bigger than a jewelry case. They lingered, talking, smiling. When she leaned in to hug him, it was not the kind of hug neighbors give. I exhaled through my nose, forced my brain to stay cool. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was not. But it was a thread, and I was ready to start pulling. The next day, I stayed low. Canceled a short trip to Denver citing personal reasons. I needed time. Time to think. Time to observe. I started watching. When I went jogging in the evening, I changed my route so I passed Tom's house. Sometimes his blinds were drawn. Sometimes not. One night, I caught a glimpse of a woman's figure in his kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug I knew well. It was Emily's mug, the one with the stupid cartoon cat she refused to throw out. Another night, I saw Tom's porch light click on and off, twice, around midnight. A signal? A habit? I didn't know yet. Days blurred together. Small changes screamed at me. Emily's old car, which she was supposed to sell, was still in Tom's driveway. The dog she adored, Molly, was not barking in my yard anymore. I heard her bark across the street. Little by little, the picture formed. But I needed proof. Not because I wanted revenge. No, not anymore. I needed clarity. I needed to know that I was not crazy. That my instincts, the ones that kept hundreds of passengers safe at 30,000 feet, were still sharp down here on the ground. I started talking to people. Casually. Carefully. At the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Kavanaugh, the nosy old woman from 2 houses down. "How's Emily?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes watching me too closely. "She's finding herself," I said with a tight smile. Mrs. Kavanaugh nodded knowingly. "Tom's been a good friend to her, hasn't he?" she said, almost teasing. I just smiled, thanked her, and walked away. Inside, I felt like I was falling through an endless sky. One evening, I parked my car down the street and waited. Watched. Tom's door opened. Emily stepped out. She was wearing one of the sweaters I had bought her last Christmas. She looked happy. She kissed him before she got into her car and drove away. I closed my eyes, leaned my head back against the seat. The kind of pain that settles deep in your chest, so deep you cannot even cry, bloomed quietly inside me. I realized then that it was true. It had been true for longer than I wanted to admit. The little things, the favors, the smiles, the help fixing the faucet, they were not innocent. They had been building something while I was flying over oceans, trusting her. But this was not the time for rage. I was not going to go over there, pound on his door, and make a fool of myself. I was not going to give either of them that satisfaction. I was going to finish this my way. With dignity. With cold, brutal clarity. The real question now was not whether Emily was gone. She was. The real question was, how long had they been planning it? And what else? What else had they taken from me while I was thousands of miles away? The investigation was just beginning, and I was ready to dig deeper, no matter what it cost me. It was not enough just to know. I needed something solid, something undeniable. Not because I planned to use it in court. Emily and I had no kids, no messy finances to split, but because I needed it for myself. Proof that my instincts had not lied to me. Proof that my heart, however battered, had been trying to warn me all along. The next morning, I drove to a small electronics store 2 towns over. Bought a discreet audio recorder, cash only. I felt ridiculous, like I was in some cheap spy movie, but I was beyond pride now. I had spent too long flying blind. It was time to land this thing, hard if I had to. I slipped the recorder into my jacket pocket and went for a casual stroll past Tom's house later that afternoon. He was out in the yard, tinkering with his motorcycle. Emily was sitting on the porch, barefoot, flipping through a magazine. I waved like nothing was wrong. Tom waved back, looking more nervous than friendly. Emily gave me a tight, almost guilty smile. Good. Let them wonder what I knew. I walked slowly past, pretending to fiddle with my phone, and let the recorder capture everything. The murmured conversation. The laughter that felt too forced. The clink of a bottle being passed back and forth. Later, in my car, I listened. Most of it was harmless. Small talk. Plans to go to the lake next weekend. But then, right at the end, Emily's voice, low and wistful. "Do you think Jack knows yet?" Tom's answer, just as quiet. "He's smart. But it's too late anyway. We've come too far." I turned off the recorder and sat there, staring at the dashboard. It was a strange feeling. Not rage, not even heartbreak. Just a cold, bitter understanding. They had crossed a line long before Emily sent that final text. And they had not planned on facing the consequences. I decided it was time to confront reality head-on. No more games. No more hiding. I started digging through the shared bank accounts. The ones we had set up years ago and had mostly ignored since. Emily had transferred $7,000 out a week before she left, marked as home repairs. Funny, the only thing that had been repaired was her conscience. I checked credit card statements. Hotel charges in town. Restaurants we had never gone to together. 2 tickets for a concert in the city. A concert I knew she had no interest in, but Tom had talked about at the last neighborhood cookout. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. It was almost beautiful in its symmetry. While I soared over oceans, navigating storms and guiding hundreds of strangers safely to their destinations, Emily had been charting a different kind of flight plan, one that ended in betrayal. The final blow came when I opened an email account we had once shared, forgotten and dusty with spam. But among the junk, a thread between Emily and Tom. Short messages. Hidden rendezvous. plans to move in together once the dust settled. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It was all there, spelled out in casual cruelty. Like I had been nothing more than an obstacle they had to step around carefully. And yet, through it all, I felt strangely calm. There was nothing left to salvage. No fight to win. No apology to hear. She had made her choice. And Tom had helped her make it. Now it was my turn to choose. And I chose freedom. I closed the laptop gently, stood up, and looked around my house. It still smelled like her. Faint traces of her perfume in the air, but even that seemed to be fading. I realized then that I was not just mourning Emily. I was mourning the man I used to be. The man who trusted too easily, loved too blindly. That man was gone now, and in his place stood someone sharper, colder, and maybe, just maybe, stronger. The first real smile in days crossed my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen the truth and survived it. The storm was not over yet, but I had my hands steady on the controls, and I was ready to see where the next flight would take me. I could have left it there. I had enough proof, enough reason to close the chapter and walk away without a second glance. But something kept gnawing at me, some whisper at the back of my mind telling me that the betrayal ran even deeper than a simple affair. I needed to understand. I needed to know why. Not for closure. That was a lie we told ourselves. I needed it to sharpen the edges of my future, to make sure I would never walk blindly into another disaster like this again. So I started talking, quietly, patiently. First, to Sarah, Emily's old friend, the one who had started dodging my calls. I caught her in the parking lot of the local pharmacy. Cornered, she had nowhere to run. "Jack," she said, nervously adjusting her sunglasses. "Hey, been meaning to call you." "Sure," I said. I kept my tone light, non-threatening. Pilots knew better than to startle turbulence into a full-blown storm. We chatted a bit. Small talk. Then, I dropped it casually, like it meant nothing. "Crazy about Emily and Tom, huh?" She flinched, just for a second, but it was enough. "You knew," I said softly. Sarah's shoulders sagged. She looked down at her shoes. "I didn't want to get involved," she whispered. It started small. You were always gone." She felt lonely. Tom was just there, helping. I nodded, even though every word felt like sandpaper against my skin. "How long?" I asked. Sarah hesitated. "Almost a year. A year. 12 months. 52 weeks of lying eyes, fake smiles, kisses that tasted like betrayal." I thanked Sarah and walked away, leaving her looking like she might cry. I did not care anymore. A year. It explained so much. The sudden distance. The meaningless fights over nothing. The way Emily had stopped asking about my trips, stopped caring when I called from the other side of the world. I went home, sat on the back porch, and watched the sun sink behind the trees. The sky bled into shades of red and gold, beautiful and brutal all at once. It hit me then. They had not just fallen into each other's arms in a moment of weakness. They had built it, brick by brick. While I was gone, chasing horizons, they had been laying the foundation of my replacement. And what hurt the most was not the betrayal itself. It was the indifference, the way I had become, expendable. Later that night, I opened a bottle of whiskey and let the burn ground me. No rage, no drunken texts, just the slow, cold acceptance that some stories do not have villains and victims. Just choices. Selfish, ugly choices. I began deleting things. Photos, messages, videos from trips we had taken. Each click was like cutting a thin, invisible thread that had kept me tied to a corpse. I started boxing up her things, too. Anything she had left behind that smelled like memory. Sweaters, books, that stupid pair of fuzzy socks she wore every winter. I stacked the boxes by the door. They could rot there for all I cared. The next morning, I booked a short trip to Montana. A cabin in the woods. No cell service. No Wi-Fi. Just time. And silence. Before I left, though, I did one last thing. I wrote Emily a letter. No begging. No accusations. Just a simple message. "I know everything. I hope you find what you were looking for. Don't come back." I left it taped to the inside of the front door. Locked the place behind me. Walked to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced across the street one last time. Tom was standing in his yard, pretending to work on his truck. He saw me. I gave him a small, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger you'll never see again. And then I drove away. Not from defeat. Not from bitterness. I was flying again. Not in a metal tube hurtling across the sky, but in my own skin, my own life. I realized then that Emily and Tom had not broken me. They had freed me. The turbulence was brutal, but I was still the pilot, and my next destination was mine to choose. Montana welcomed me with open, aching silence. The cabin I had rented sat at the edge of a dense forest, so far from the nearest town that even the dirt roads seemed unsure of their direction. It was exactly what I needed. No neighbors, no accusations, no familiar places heavy with memory. The first night, I built a fire in the stone hearth and sat in front of it for hours, just listening to the crackle and snap of burning wood. No TV, no phone buzzing, just the sound of something old, something real. I thought about Emily, about how she had changed, or maybe how she had always been, and I had simply refused to see it. I thought about Tom, how easy it must have been for him, stepping into my life, picking up the pieces while I was halfway around the world, too busy trusting to notice the knife at my back. But mostly, I thought about myself, about the man who had once dreamed of flying as a kid, who believed that distance could never touch love, who believed in promises whispered in the dark. He was gone now, and maybe that was not such a bad thing. The next morning, I went for a hike up a rocky trail behind the cabin. The air was crisp, biting at my lungs, waking up muscles I had not used in months. Every step felt like stripping away another layer of the past. At the summit, the world stretched out before me. Endless trees, rivers cutting through the land like silver threads, mountains standing guard against the horizon. I sat down on a flat rock and just breathed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was not thinking about Emily, or Tom, or what had been stolen from me. I was just there, alive, present. It was a small thing, but it was everything. Days passed in a rhythm that had nothing to do with flight schedules or phone calls. Wake up with the sun, chop wood, walk the trails, read old books left behind in the cabin's dusty shelves. And little by little, the anger faded. The betrayal became just another scar, tender when touched, but no longer bleeding. One afternoon, while cleaning out the old storage shed behind the cabin, I found a battered journal wedged behind a crate. The name inside was faded, almost unreadable. But the entries told the story of a man who had come here decades ago after losing everything: his job, his family, his purpose. The man wrote about how the silence had saved him, how being forced to face himself without distractions had been the hardest thing and the most necessary. I closed the journal carefully and sat for a long time, staring at nothing. Maybe we all crash at some point. Maybe that's how we learn to build better wings. On the sixth night, as the fire dwindled to embers, I made a decision. I was done mourning, done asking questions that would never have good answers. Emily had chosen her path. So had Tom. Now it was my turn to choose mine. I poured myself the last glass of whiskey from the bottle I had brought and raised it toward the empty room. To turbulence, I said aloud. May it teach us how to fly better. And with that, I set the empty glass down and turned out the light. Tomorrow, I would start planning the next chapter. Not running away from the past. Not pretending it had not happened, but carrying it like a map, a reminder of where not to go again. The cabin had no mirrors, but if it did, I think I would have recognized the man staring back at me. Not the husband betrayed, not the pilot lost in storm clouds, but something new, something steadier. The man who had walked through fire and learned how to breathe again. And somewhere deep inside, where it mattered most, I knew I was just getting started. When I finally left Montana, it was not because I felt forced to. It was because I was ready. The cabin had done its work, scraped me raw, stripped away the illusions, and left something leaner and harder beneath the skin. I drove back to my town like a man returning to a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. I half expected to feel anger again when I pulled into my driveway. But instead, there was only a strange detachment, like looking at an old photograph of someone I barely recognized. The house felt different now, colder, quieter, but it was mine. Not because Emily had abandoned it, but because I had reclaimed it. Her boxes were still by the door where I had left them. Untouched, unclaimed, just gathering dust. I did not bother calling her. If she wanted her things, she could send someone. Or not. It was no longer my problem. I spent the first week cleaning the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away more than dirt, scrubbing away her memory. Every pillow she had chosen, every picture frame she had hung, went into donation piles. It was not anger that fueled me. It was survival. A few neighbors waved at me now. Some looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to say. I did not blame them. Gossip had likely flooded the street long before I found out the truth. Let them wonder. Let them tell their half-true stories over barbecue grills and backyard fences. I had nothing to hide anymore. The first real test came sooner than I expected. A week after my return, I ran into Tom at the hardware store. He was standing by the checkout line, holding a bag of nails and a can of paint. He looked older somehow, smaller, as if the weight of what he had done had finally begun to settle into his bones. For a moment, our eyes met. He opened his mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, but I just shook my head once. Not in anger, in dismissal. There was nothing he could say that would matter now. Some bridges burned so completely that even the ashes blow away. I paid for my supplies and walked out without another word. The air outside tasted cleaner. At home, I threw myself into projects. Fixing the sagging fence, repainting the guest bedroom, building new shelves for the garage. Each board nailed in place felt like rebuilding myself, piece by stubborn piece. And then, when I least expected it, life shifted again. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was at the local farmer's market, buying fresh bread and vegetables, when I bumped, literally, into someone carrying a heavy crate of apples. She laughed, brushing her hair out of her face, and apologized first. "No worries," I said, smiling back without thinking. Her name was Leah. She had just moved into the next neighborhood over. Divorced. Starting over. I did not believe in signs anymore. But there was something in the way she looked at me, direct, open, unafraid, that made a small, cautious hope stir inside me. We talked for a few minutes. About nothing important. About how the tomatoes looked better last year. About the best hiking trails in the area. It was easy. Effortless in a way I had forgotten existed. When she smiled before leaving, it was not an invitation. It was a promise. If you want to heal, you are not alone. I watched her walk away, the sun catching in her hair, and for the first time in a long time, the future did not look like a closed door. It looked like an open sky. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the stars come out one by one. No whiskey in hand. No bitterness gnawing at my gut. Just a man who had flown through the worst kind of storm and somehow found his wings still held. I did not know where the next journey would take me. Maybe nowhere special. Maybe somewhere incredible. But wherever it was, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally flying toward it on my own terms. Days turned into weeks. The more time passed, the lighter I felt, like some heavy, invisible weight had finally fallen off my shoulders. I saw Leah again, this time at the hiking trailhead, tying her shoes and laughing at the stubbornness of her dog, a scrappy golden retriever named Max. We ended up walking together for a while, talking about everything and nothing. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people moving forward at their own pace. When we reached the top of the trail, she turned to me and said, "You look like someone who's finally breathing again." I smiled. It was not forced. It was real. Later that evening, back at home, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the nights spent wondering what I had done wrong. And for the first time, I did not feel the old anger or sadness. I just felt grateful. Grateful that the worst had come and gone. Grateful that it had cleared a path I never would have found otherwise. Before going to bed, I walked out onto the porch. The sky was wide and endless above me. The air was cool against my skin. I was not looking back anymore. I was not trapped in old wounds. I was finally, quietly, moving forward. And somehow, that felt better than any revenge ever could. A month later, I put the house up for sale. It was not a decision made out of anger, just a simple truth. That house belonged to a life I no longer lived. I packed only what mattered. The rest I left behind, like old skin shed after a long winter. Before leaving, I stood one last time in the empty living room. There was no sadness, no regret, just gratitude for what I had survived, for who I had become. I locked the door and walked away without looking back. Ahead of me was a new city, a new home, maybe even a new love someday. But whatever waited, I was ready. I was no longer the man who had been left behind. I was the man who kept flying, even after the storm. And this time, the sky was all mine.